How many of us think we've got a right to be free?
Yeah.
How many of us think we've got a right to defend ourselves? How many of us think we've got a right to defend ourselves with guns if necessary?
Yeah.
How many of us recognize that these rights are not something granted to us by the government, but given to us by God as human beings made in the image of the Lord?
Yeah.
And what God gives us, no government should be allowed to take away.
You're right.
You know, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All right, we're up here because all over this country, the government is attempting to take our guns away. You know, when I just recited the Second Amendment, did you hear anything about hunting?
No.
Did you hear anything about Bambi in a Kevlar vest? The reason we have a Second Amendment is because the drafters of our Constitution, the people that reduced our God-given rights to writing, recognized the fact that we needed to have an armed populace to keep the government from having a monopoly on power. And that's what the Second Amendment is all about. That's why we have gentlemen like this here sweating his ass off in armor, carrying a gun to protect our freedoms. Well, let me tell you a little bit about how I happen to be on this stage today. You know, I've been a lifelong Republican. My dad was a member of the John Birch Society. I've been campaigning against communist expansionism my entire life. I started giving public presentations against communist expansionism and this trend towards a single world socialist government in 1977 with Robert Mugabe's takeover of St. Louis. Takeover of Rhodesia. The first guy to endorse my Senate campaign was Colonel Oliver North, because he and I have been friends for over 30 years since we started doing fundraisers for him when the government was persecuting him for trying to save this country. But you know, as a little bit of background, St. Louis, Missouri is a remarkably dangerous place. Those of you that live out here in the civilized world can't possibly imagine what it's like. A couple of years ago, Rudy Giuliani and Bernie Kerik, the former police commissioner in New York, came down and spent a couple of days with us. And when we were out to dinner, I was talking to Bernie about how the danger levels between New York City and the city of St. Louis. How many of us think New York City might be kind of a dangerous place, huh? Well, 8,400,000 residents of the city of New York. By that point that year, they had about 300 murders. City of St. Louis proper only has 300,000 citizens. We'd had 262 murders, almost 20 times the murder rate of New York City when they were having a bad year. And that's just the general level of background violence in St. Louis. Then you've got to add to that the George Floyd effect, all right? On June the 1st and June the 2nd of 2020, those people who claim the moral high ground, those people that claim superiority to us and are champions of diversity and equity and inclusion, decided to show their love for the city of St. Louis by burning it down. That night, they burned down downtown St. Louis. They shot 4 police officers. They killed retired police captain David Dorn. He was doing secondary employment at a pawn shop about a half a mile from my house. But the most impressive thing my wife and I watched, we saw this on a live helicopter feed from downtown St. Louis. The 7-Eleven in downtown St. Louis, 2 blocks from police headquarters, somebody threw a brick through the window, broke out the glass. The mob came in and looted the place empty. Then they set it on fire. The place becomes engulfed in flames. The roof caves in. 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes we watched this. And you know how many police showed up? 0. You know how many firemen showed up? 0. We look at each other and we say, you know, when the fit hits the shan, you're out there and you're wild lonesome. And during that month, more and more of the buildings in our neighborhood started getting trashed, and more buildings got boarded up. There's a little mom and pop pharmacy around the corner from my office, which is 3 blocks further into the ghetto than my house. One day we go over there and the steel roll-up doors had been torn off their tracks and the windows are all boarded up. So I went to the owner and I said, what happened? He said, last Friday the alarm went off. I said, did you come down and see what was going on? He said, no, I didn't want to get killed. I said, so what happened? Well, they came in, they stole everything they could steal, they broke everything they couldn't break. How long were they in there? 5 hours. I said, the cops ever show up? He said, yeah, 10 hours after the alarm went off. Once again, when the fit hits the shan, you're out there and you're wild lonesome. Well, my wife and I had made a vow that if it came our direction, we weren't going to let it happen to us. And you know, one of the advantages of living in a Democrat-controlled city now for 79 years is that's how long the Democrats one-party rule in St. Louis. One of the advantages is that criminals don't have to fear repercussion for crime. And so in our case, this Antifa organization put out a flyer saying they're going to have a mob action in our neighborhood. And this mob is organized by a young lady whose name you may know, Cori Bush, now the United States Representative for the 1st District of Missouri. She's heading this Antifa mob called Expect Us St. Louis. And they say they're going to come and have a mob action in our neighborhood. Well, because we know they like to burn stuff, and there's a lot of things in our house, including us, that we didn't want to have burned up, I went out and got a whole bunch of fire extinguishers and put them around the first floor. And because we know they like to shoot people, and we didn't want to get shot without putting up a fight, I put a whole bunch of guns around the house. Well, that Sunday afternoon, June the 28th, 2020, our daughter had come in from Chicago. She was 30 at the time, to have dinner with us on the patio. We start hearing the mob forming down the street. And you start hearing the chants, all the same dumbass stuff. Our streets, no justice, no peace, no racist police. And my favorite one, because it was being chanted, the favorite one, because it's being chanted through a megaphone by Cori Bush, is, you can't stop the revolution. You can't stop the revolution. Well, all of a sudden, I live in a private neighborhood. There's a neighborhood back 130 years ago when St. Louis was a big, dirty industrial town. People that could do so bought some farmland out in the country, put a wall around it, and called them private places. They're now all engulfed in the city itself. But I live in one of those, and we're separated by a wall and steel iron gates from the rest of St. Louis. There's a 6-lane public street that goes right outside my gate. That's called Kings Highway Boulevard. All of a sudden, when we start hearing these chants and you hear them thumping their sticks and their feet in the ground, all of a sudden, all of Kings Highway Boulevard, 100 feet wide, as far south as we could look, is filled with these people, angry people, screaming, shouting, spittle coming out of their mouth. I look over at Patty and I say, God, I hope they don't come this direction. Right then, the gate bursts open and they start pouring in. Well, I stood out on the corner of the porch and I said the two most racist, white supremacist words known in the English language. I said, private property. Now, being communists, that pissed them off, right? And so they start storming in more and more and more. And I'm standing out there with my AR now. I pulled it from around the corner where I had it. And I'm standing there holding my AR, saying all kinds of mean, nasty, unpleasant things to this mob, like, get out of my neighborhood, private property. I actually swore once. I said, get the hell out of my neighborhood. And they just keep pouring in more and more. Now, Patty and our daughter had gone into the house to call 911 to absolutely no avail. But then she realizes that I can't see anything past the east side of our yard and the mob's completely covering the street. So she goes out the front door. All of a sudden, I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm standing up there with my rifle. I got about 20 feet of grass, a hedge, a low wall, and about another 20 feet of grass between me and the mob. Now I see Patty show up in front of me, 2 feet from the nearest gangster, waving that dumbass little Bryco pistol over her head. And now I've got a problem because she's in my line of fire, right? And so if I have to do something, I might accidentally put a bullet in her. We'd been married 35 years at that point. I didn't want to accidentally, put a pellet in her. So now I've got to come out on the front porch. And now that's when you start seeing all the pictures like you'll see up there. But here's the advantage of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Two of us with two guns facing a mob of 350 to 500, who, by the way, we're not social justice warriors walking calmly on the way to the mayor's house because A, mayor don't live in our neighborhood. Mayor does not live in a private place. Mayor lives 2 blocks north and a half a mile west of our house. Secondly, they had to break down that gate to store him in. The minute they broke down that gate, they stopped being a peaceful protest and started being an angry mob. And they're screaming, I'm going to murder you. I'm going to rape and murder your wife. We're going to burn down your house. You got a business. Your business is gone. They even threatened to kill our dog, right? But we stood there and we held our peace. If you look closely at the picture that will come up on the truck there in a minute, or my souvenir cards, you'll see that the selector switch with my AR is in the fire position because it was not this passive event that the media likes to portray. The story behind that particular moment was that there are 2 guys wearing body armor. One guy wearing camo, he comes up the steps and he reaches into his ammo pouches and pulls out 2 loaded magazines. He's close enough I can see that they're loaded with shells, clicks them together, points at me and says, you are next. Guy next to him is wearing Desert Shield type body armor. He turns around, it says human shield on the back, and he's packing a sidearm. And they keep creeping up closer and closer and closer. I look over at Patty and I say, if those guys come any closer, I'm going to have to kill them. And Patty leans over to me and she says, you're not killing anybody tonight. The voice of reason. But we didn't have to shoot anybody. We didn't have to fire a shot. But we held off a mob of 350 to 500 people. And that's the value of the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
Now, what y'all probably don't know, because the media didn't pick it up, because it's counter-narrative and it's hard to sell as peaceful social justice warriors, we got a tip that next Tuesday from a client of ours who is a brainwashed member of that Antifa organization, who called up and said that what we did was inexcusable. They're coming back on Friday, that we're going to have to die, and they're going to burn down the house, and there's nothing we can do about it. And this wasn't just some kind of idle comment. This was a lady who we'd known for years. We'd represented her and her mom and her sisters. We went to her high school graduation. When her husband got out of the Army, he joined the St. Louis Police Department, got depressed and shot himself. We went to his funeral. There'd be times when we'd be the only Caucasians at their family events. We thought of these people as family, but she had become brainwashed by this Antifa organization. And so we know we're going to die on Friday. We called up the guys that sometimes we have to hire for secondary employment, St. Louis City and St. Louis County cops. They wanted no part of it for fear of the bad press. We got referred to this place down in Farmington, Missouri. They do high-tech security all over the world, a place called Asymmetric Response, bunch of special forces guys. They'd gotten negative publicity over the Ferguson riots. They wouldn't do it. So I said to the owner, what the hell am I supposed to do? And he says, if I were you, I'd just take what I can't live without, put it in the vehicles, and abandon the house. And I said, no effing way in heck we're going to do that. We'll go down with a ship if we have to, but there's no way we're going to abandon our house to the mob. Well, earlier that week, I'd gotten a call from the White House, and the gentleman said, the president wants to express his support, and if there's ever anything we can do for you, give us a call. So now it's Thursday night, and we're planning on dying the next day, so I called that number back up, and I said, well, now's a pretty stinking good time, okay? And so he gave me Mark Meadows' cell phone number, chief of staff, and I called up Mark Meadows and told him this story. Next call I made was to Tucker Carlson, and Tucker puts this live on the air. He says, I'm talking to Mark McCloskey. I can hear Mrs. McCloskey sobbing in the background. The mob's coming back tomorrow to kill him. The local police have been ordered to stand down. The state's not going to provide them with any cover. And if we don't do something, they're going to die. Well, to make a long story short, when the mob hit the gate that next Tuesday, that next Friday night, the miracle started to happen. There was a guy who was a ex-Navy SEAL, fourth-generation cattle farmer from Kansas. When he heard the call to arms, he took his gear and threw it in the back of his pickup truck, drove straight through and got there at about 6:30. By the time the mob hit the gate that night at 7, we had 6 ex-Navy SEALs, we had 10 secondary employment cops, we had the FBI light aircraft circling the top of the house, we had what we used to call in the Reagan administration, peace through superior firepower. And once again, we held them off, right? We didn't have to shoot anybody. We did have a pretty good show of force. 2 things I always like to talk about from that night. One is that once again, here's Cori Bush, now Congresswoman Cori Bush, an overt, active communist, standing outside my gate again that Friday night, chanting into the megaphone, you can't stop the revolution. Actually, she had a really nice singing voice. I can't approximate it. You can't stop the revolution. Jim, the SEAL, resting his hands on the butt of his M4, standing next to me, says, oh yes, I can. Second thing I always like to relate, it's about 2:30 in the morning, right? And Jim, that SEAL was my personal protection that night. We made a big point of being outside on the porch, on the patios, so that people could see that they hadn't intimidated us. About 2:30 in the morning, Jim jumps on me and knocks me down. I say, what the hell's going on? He says, well, we were scoping some of the surrounding high-rises, and we saw somebody scoping back and thought you're about to get taken out. Right then his radio goes off. Turns out it was an FBI sniper doing cover for us. So the good news that night, we got the all clear at about 4:30 in the morning. And we got a couple hours of sleep. At about 6:30 in the morning, we realized we'd survived it. We hung a big American flag outside the front of our house, and we made a vow that day that we were going to do everything we could for the rest of our lives to pull back our freedoms, to restore our republic, to make this United States the way it was when we were kids. And we figured the best way to do that was go to work for President Trump. And so we joined the Trump campaign. We started out campaigning with Colonel Allen West down in Texas. For a while, Patty and I were the Team Trump bus in Pennsylvania, as where Patty is from. And you know, it was not very hard stepping out of that Team Trump bus to talk to people. And by the way, you got to imagine what this is like. We'd pull up from town to town. There'd be people lining the streets with, you know, Make America Great Again banners and Trump banners and shouting and clapping. You get out of the bus. And it's not very hard to sell people on the concept that the president who had restored us to the greatest nation on earth, where we had the highest employment figures in every demographic. We had oil self-sufficiency. We had a strong military and a closed border. It wasn't very hard to sell that as a positive message. But you know what? Our reward for standing up against that mob was that the city of St. Louis circuit attorney charged Patty and me with 2 felonies each. 2 Class C felonies that would cost us 4 years in the slammer, our law licenses, ruin the rest of our lives. And you know, fortunately, this Soros-funded prosecutor, go nameless, Kim Gardner, just as dumb as a sack of hammers. And so she used us in her campaign propaganda to raise money. So we filed a motion to have her excluded on the basis of her bias, and we got her and the entire circuit attorney's office barred from our case. So then we got a special prosecutor appointed who was a Barack Obama U.S. attorney for 8 years. So we figured that might not work out so well, but it finally did. And the quirk of Missouri law is that the governor can't pardon you until you've finally been found guilty of something. So we had to find something to plead to that would be nominal, essentially not a crime, just a fine, so the governor could give us a full pardon. And we did that, and we thought that was the end of it. But then, just to make life that much sweeter, the Missouri Bar Association decided that what we did in standing up on our front porch and defending ourselves against a mob that threatened to kill us was a crime of moral turpitude, and that we shouldn't be allowed to practice law anymore. So they suggested to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed that we should have our licenses suspended for 6 months, probated for a year. Patty just got her get out of jail free card last week. I got my get out of jail free card in February. But that's what happens to you if you stand up. There's only one unforgivable crime in America today, and that's standing up against the left. If you're on the left, you can commit any crime you want to. A guy I was on the radio with a couple of months ago put it this way, and I thought it was very succinct. In this country today, you're not considered innocent until proven guilty. You're considered guilty until proven Democrat. And that's exactly the way things are. People on the press, people even on Fox News, which I used to be on somewhat frequently until they showed their true rhino colors, call it a 2-tiered justice system. But there's no such thing as a 2-tiered justice system. If there is not equal protection under the law, there is no justice system. There's only tyranny, and that's what we have today. We have a federal government that has absolute disdain for the Constitution, absolute disdain for our freedoms, absolute disdain for our God-given rights. We have a president that openly acknowledges that his programs are unconstitutional, but does them anyway. 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court declared his student loan giveaway unconstitutional, and so what he's doing now, a new unconstitutional student loan giveaway. He created, in the United States of America, with the First Amendment to the Constitution, he created a disinformation governance board, a federal censorship board. It took a judge in Louisiana last week to issue an order compelling the federal government to not conspire with big tech to censor us. You imagine that in the United States of America? And then ask yourself this. Next time you think about voting for somebody, think about this. Where were 49 United States Republican senators? Why weren't they standing on the Capitol steps screaming, "We cannot have this in the United States of America. We cannot have this with the First Amendment to the Constitution"? All you got was crickets. Where was Mitch McConnell? When the FBI raids Mar-a-Lago, when they go through Melania Trump's underwear drawer, when they search Barron Trump's lockers, when they invade the home of the President of the United States and the front runner for re-election to the presidency of the United States, when they invade his home, Where is Kevin McCarthy? Where is Mitch McConnell? Where is every single Republican that should have stood up and said, we are not a banana republic. We cannot have this in a free republic. We are the United States of America. Absolute stinking crickets. It makes absolutely no difference if they've got an R behind their name or a D behind their name, because every one of these things is going the same direction. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we now call the Great Reset. We call this a single world socialist government, going towards what Klaus Schwab says over in Davos: you will own nothing and you'll be happy, or else. And what are the January 6th political prisoners all about, right? Out of the 350 to 500 people that broke down my gate, stormed into my neighborhood, threatened to kill me, rape and murder my wife, burn down my house, burn down my office building, even kill my dog, not one of those people has done a day in jail. Why are the January 6ers rotting in that gulag in D.C.? It's not just to punish them. It's to threaten all of us. To say, intimidate the rest of us. To say that if you're willing to stand up for your freedom, stand up for your rights, stand up for your God-given human rights, that we will cut your head off, that we will crush you. Ask Roger Stone about it. Ask General Mike Flynn. They will want to crush you economically. I said the day after our first event, on June the 29th, that Monday morning, I said, the first TV interview I did, I said, if I'd been the managing partner of the largest law firm in St. Louis, that Monday morning, I'd have to get out there and do the apology to her. Apologize for being born. Apologize for being white. Apologize for being successful. And I'd still get fired, and I still wouldn't have a job till today. And you know what? That's what intimidates everybody else. That's why nobody stands up. But ladies and gentlemen, if you think that the government is going to save you, that some cavalry is going to come riding over the hill and save us and restore our freedom, you are dead wrong. How many of us here think there's going to be some kind of political solution to our current crisis?
Nope.
I ask that every rally. I never see a hand go up. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a real stinking problem. And I tell you this, I've been, after we got done with the Trump campaign, people started asking me if I wanted to run for Senate, since our senior rhino Republican in Missouri was not going to run for re-election. And I said no, because, I'd been an active person in politics in the background, fundraisers and such, never had any interest in elected politics. But people kept asking. Well, there's a neighbor of mine that was in the Reagan cabinet, so I called him up and I said, what do you think about the concept of me running for U.S. Senate? And he said, just go outside, drive some nails through your feet, it'll feel better and it won't take as long, okay? I did not heed his advice. But, the bottom line is that what we learned on the campaign trail was the greatest education I've ever had. Because the one thing we learned, Missouri used to be a very, very blue state. Now it's a very, very red state. We've got super majorities in both houses of Congress. We've got a Republican governor who used to be a very good sheriff, a guy that created constitutional carry for us and the Second Amendment Preservation Act. But now Missouri is a bright red state, and everybody would come up to us during the campaign and say, this used to be a Democrat county. Now every office in the courthouse and the state building is owned by a Republican. I said, no, they're not. These are the same people who used to have D's behind their names. They put an R behind their name now because they know they can't get elected as a Democrat. Those are not constitutional conservatives. Those are not people that respect the Constitution. Those are not people that are coming to save you. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to save this republic, if we're going to pull back our freedoms, each and every one of us needs to take a personal stand for our own freedom. We need to stand up and just say no. I do this in every single speech. I recite those lines from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, securing their just powers from the consent of the governed. And that's us, ladies and gentlemen. When any one of these bad things happen, when the President of the United States or Congress does something which is unconstitutional or contrary to our God-given rights, it's only allowed to happen because the American people don't stand up and withdraw that consent of the government. Stand up and say, we will not tolerate this. Stand up and say, we will be a free people. We will not be sheep. And that's what each and every one of us has to do. We have to, Patrick Henry, 247, I think, years ago, stood up in Philadelphia and said, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And that's the point we're at in the United States today, that you have to be willing to risk everything, your livelihood, your home, your fortunes, your business, your lives if necessary. That was the price of forming this country. That's going to be the price of preserving this country. So each and every one of us need to take that personal stand for freedom. The only way we're going to turn this thing around, in my humble opinion, if we have widespread civil disobedience that just say no and hell no. And if peaceful civil disobedience doesn't work, if the government comes in and tries to seize our guns and tries to revoke all of our God-given freedoms, then that's where the Second Amendment comes back in. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the Second Amendment is there to stand in the way of government tyranny. Y'all might remember, all of you who are Second Amendment advocates might remember when David Chipman was running for the position of the head of ATF. And they asked him, because he always wants to do away with what he calls assault weapons, they asked him if he could identify or define an assault weapon. He was unable to do so. Well, a couple of days later, I was on a national TV program, and I was giving him shit about that, pardon my language. And so the guy says, "You're so smart, Mr. McCloskey, can you describe an assault weapon?" I said, "Sure, it's easy. It's an effective defense against an overreaching government." And that's what we have a duty to do, a right to do, a God-given right to do. And each and every one of us needs to be prepared to do that, to stand up for our own freedom, to be proud to be Americans, to proud to have our God-given rights, proud of the Constitution, proud to kneel when we pray, and stand for the American flag. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo-hoo.